Professor Wergely's here. We just got done moving objects onto the display based off the audio file that's playing. So we changed the radius, we're moving objects on the screen, we're rotating objects, changing the color. What I want to show you next is how to switch a song while the audio visualizer is playing. So you'll notice when the audio visualizer is playing, I have this audio spectrum listener, and it's similar to the timeline. When we had our stopwatch, we couldn't update the timeline while the timeline was playing. We needed to stop the timeline, update the watch, and then start the timeline again. So the concept is similar. Now, I have a next method. So we're going to use the next method to alter the song that's playing. So the first thing we need to do is we need to check to see if the audio spectrum listener is running or the media player is running. So you'll see I'm grabbing the audio spectrum listener, make sure it's not equal to null, and I'm going to get the status of the media player. If it's playing, then I'm going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. So that's where this is running method comes into play. So if it's running, then I'm going to make sure that I stop the media player. So I'll say media player stop. And no matter what, whether it's running or not, we want to increment the value of x. So just to make sure it's working properly, I'm going to print out the x value before, and then I need to make sure x does not reach out of our array index, because if I get an array index out of bounds exception, it could crash the program. So here I'm going to make sure x is not equal to the last index. If it is equal, so we want to make sure it doesn't go greater than the length, but we want to make sure it's not only the length, but songs length minus 1. Okay, length minus 1, because if I have 4 elements in an array, the last index will be 3. So we'll do length minus 1, and if it is, we're going to set x back to 0. Now this is essentially in iTunes if you want to repeat the playlist. So the playlist will play all the way through. Once it hits the last song, it's going to start over again. So here's my repeat. After we've made sure x is in the bounds, we're going to set up the UI, passing in songs x, and then once everything's set up correctly, we're going to go ahead and start the media player again. Now, if it's playing, it's going to stop the media player, switch the song, set up the UI again, and play the song again. If it's not running, it's going to go ahead and switch the song and then play automatically. Now, setup UI will set the spectrum listener. So every time I call setup UI, we're going to create a new instance of the media, create a new media player, set the band, set the interval, and set the audio spectrum listener, which is then going to update the display. So based off this audio spectrum listener, I have different values based off that audio file. And based off the magnitudes and phases, I can then update the display. I've also seen people update the display with the timestamp. It all just depends on what you're going to do. So these are my inputs, and this is how I'm updating the display. So that's what happens when I call setup UI. Now, I want to make sure x is printing out properly, so I'm going to print out x after our increment, but I'm not incrementing x yet. Where am I going to increment x? I'm actually going to increment x right here in the if statement. So I'm going to increment x. If x is equal to the song length minus 1, I'm going to set it back to 0. I'm going to set up the UI and then play the media player. Okay, so conceptually, this is the same as what we did for the timeline. If the timeline's running, stop the timeline, update some of the parameters, set up the timeline, play the timeline. That's exactly what we did when we changed the tick time in seconds. Now, let's see if this works. So I'm going to play. Okay, you'll notice the song didn't play immediately after I started the program. So what I can do is I have a few parameters here. On the media player, I can set autoplay equal to true. That's a good thing to do while I'm testing. And sometimes you may not want to listen to the actual music. You just want to see if it's running and what values you're getting. So you can also set mute equal to true if you don't want to listen to that audio file. But right now we do want to listen. Just letting you know that's an option. I'm going to set autoplay to true. So now when I run the program, it should play automatically. Coming back down to the next, let's see if this works correctly. You see the autoplay worked correctly. I'm playing the song. X should now be 0. If I click on next, you'll see the next song plays. If I stop it, Scroll back up. Let me try again. So I'll click play, click next, stop it. Okay, here you'll see X before was 1, X after was 2, and then you can see the song that it loads. So it is working correctly, but you'll want to test this. You'll want to make sure it works when it gets to the end of the list. So if I play, click on next, click on next. Let me scroll up to the song list. Let's see where we're at. So we're on RUN. Click on next. Now we're on Jack Johnson. So we're on this song right before the end. Click on next. You'll see it plays the last song. Click on next again. It went back to Sublime. So now we're playing the first song. So it did work properly at the end of the list. It switched through all the songs. It's going to stop the media player, switch the song, increase the X value, and then play the media player again. Now, even if the audio player is not working, so let's say I do a stop and click next, you'll see it switches to the next song and then plays automatically. Okay, because that's how we set up our if statement. If it's running, I'm going to stop. Otherwise, I'm going to increment X, set up the UI, and go ahead and play with the new X value. So this is the way that you can have a next button on your challenge. So for the challenge, if you want to be able to switch songs, you can put a next button there, which will be nice. That way the user doesn't have to pick the song every time. You can automatically pick, and maybe you randomize the playlist. Right now I'm just incrementing, but maybe you select a random number and you can randomly pick the song. Adding extra features like this will be a good chance for you to get bonus points. This song right here is a good one to test because it has the high frequencies moving once the drummer hits the cymbal. If you'll watch here for a second. You can see hit the cymbal there and then it went up. This intro is a good test for the visualizer to see it's working properly. See, it went up again. The visualizer is updating in real time. Also happens with the snare drum as well. Okay, so you can see it is updating based off the actual song that's being played. If next gets to the end, it'll loop through and play the next song. So the next button is working properly. Now, I've seen some pretty cool stuff. Students have used 3D elements before. I've seen a record player and the record was spinning, and on top of the record they have different objects that were moving and increasing in size, decreasing in size, spinning. One project, it was in outer space and they had planets. The planets were rotating around the sun, and based off of different audio frequencies, the stars were increasing in size, so the stars were flashing. This project is a good project to get your artistic side out. You can show your creative side, show how awesome you can make your user interface. You can change things up, use different shapes, use images, use videos. Basically, it's open to anything that you want to do. Now, make sure it's school appropriate. I actually saw one student, they took a picture of themselves, and based off of the audio file playing, they would be dancing. So the legs would be moving, and the arms would be moving, and the mouth would be moving based off the words that were actually being said in the song. So I've seen a lot of cool stuff. The main thing that you have to remember is I have an audio file playing, and while the audio file is playing, I have these inputs here. So I have timestamp, magnitudes, and phases. Now, I need to use these values that are coming in from the audio file and try to update the user interface in a way that is aesthetically pleasing, or that makes it look like I tried to do that and it's just not a random mess. Okay, so use these values. You also have duration, but you'll see duration is remaining the same at this time because that's the interval that we set. For timestamp, the student who did the rotating planets used the timestamp to help them rotate around the sun. You could also use phases, which is negative pi to positive pi, and magnitudes, which is 0 to negative 60, based off the decibel at the current band. These are the inputs you have. Use them to update the display to make an awesome challenge. That's all for this lecture. Stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you next time.